All right, now I want to introduce you to a super awesome tool for getting real-time diagnostics and insights into your application. It's called Glimpse. So open up Package Manager console and install package glimpse.mvc5. And one more time, but this time glimpse.ef or Entity Framework 6. Okay, now run the application and navigate to glimpse.axd. So Glimpse adds this endpoint in your application, and here you can turn it on or off. This dashboard is only accessible locally for security reasons. So if you want to use Glimpse on an application that is deployed to production, you need to do additional steps, and you can read about it in the documentation of Glimpse. Now let's turn this on. So basically, Glimpse puts a cookie on your machine, and this cookie is sent back and forth with each request. On the server, Glimpse has a module that intercepts every request. If it finds this cookie, it will render diagnostics information for you. Let's have a look. So I'm going to navigate to list of customers. Okay, look, we get this little bar on the bottom of the screen. Here we have 3 tabs: HTTP, Host, and Ajax. And if you hover over any of these tabs, you see more details. So this request took almost 700 milliseconds to execute. In the Host tab, we can see what methods have been called to handle this request. So it was the index action or the index method of customer's controller. Now let's click on this G icon here. There is tons of data here in various tabs, and you really need to play with them yourself or read the documentation. But briefly, you can look at the items in the cache, you can look at the configuration settings used on the server, you can look at the HTTP request, MVC routes, and so on. Now on this page, we're using Ajax to populate the list of customers. It's our data table plugin that is querying our API to get the list of customers, right? So let's go to the Ajax tab. As you see, we have an Ajax request that took 7 milliseconds to execute. Let's inspect this request. Now, if you navigate to any of these tabs here, you see data related to this Ajax request. So we go to SQL tab. You see we have had 1 connection to the database, 1 query, and the total execution time of this query was 3 milliseconds. And if you scroll down, you can see the actual query that Entity Framework executed on our database. Now let me show you something. Don't type, just watch what I'm doing. In the customer class, I'm going to make this membership type navigation property virtual. This is one of those bad practices that many tutorials, including Microsoft tutorials, teach you. With this, you get lazy loading, which is the opposite of eager loading. So instead of loading a bunch of objects together, objects are loaded only if our code touches one or more of the navigation properties of an object. Why is this bad? Because in web applications, you should know ahead of time what data you're going to return to the client. With lazy loading, you will have multiple round trips to the database, and this will have a significant impact on the performance of your application. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to go to the customer's controller. And in the index action, I'm going to get the list of customers here. And then put them in the view. This is just for demonstration, okay? So here I'm not using the include method, which is for eager loading. Now let's go to this view. I'm going to iterate over these customers and render them and their membership type in a bunch of list items. So for each var customer in model, render customer.name and customer.membership type.name. Now build, back to the browser, refresh. Now in the SQL tab of Glimpse, you see we have 3 connections and 3 queries, which used to be 1. Let's take a look at the actual query. So here's our first query, which is basically selecting multiple columns from the customers table. Then we have 2 more queries to get the membership type for each customer. We didn't have these 2 queries in the past. So what's happening here? Well, in our controller, when this line is executed, Entity Framework queries the database to get the list of customers. But their membership type is not loaded. It's not eager loaded. But here in the view, when we're iterating over each customer, when we touch the membership type property, Entity Framework is going to query the database again to get the membership type for that customer. So it will open a new connection, execute the query, close the connection, and the same story repeats for each customer in the list. So if we have n customers in the database, we'll have one query to get the list of customers and n queries to get the membership type for each customer. Now, more accurately, this is the worst case scenario. So in reality, it could be less than n. But that aside, this is what we call n+1 issue. And that's one of the questions that sometimes comes up in job interviews. So the bottom line is you should avoid lazy loading in web applications at all times. Now back in the browser, with Glimpse, you can easily keep an eye on the queries running on your database by Entity Framework. So if you find a slow page on your website, first open up Glimpse, see what's happening under the hood. What queries are being run on the database? How many queries do we have? What is the execution time of these queries? If you find an Entity Framework query that shows to be slow, then you can optimize by creating a store procedure and calling it via your DB context. Explanation of this is really beyond the scope of ASP.NET MVC course, and if you want to learn it, I would suggest to look at my Entity Framework course on Udemy.